Chainsaw Man chapter 231, Goodbye Poshita, might be the most divisive chapter I believe we've seen of all of part 2, and I want to talk about it. I want to go into detail about how I feel about the chapter, where I think Chainsaw Man is going, and how I believe with a shadow of a doubt that there's going to be a part 3. So before we go into more detail about everything that happens, let's go through the chapter page by page. So the chapter continues off from last chapter where Denji was getting dipped by that low-kissed devil, and we see a bird in the sky, we see clouds, and we see Poshita on top of Denji. Poshita says, Denji, looks like we got eaten by a devil. Denji says, for real, that's bad. What's gonna happen to us? Poshita gets off of Denji and says, our dream life together is over, but maybe that's a good thing. Denji's like, no way, that ain't good. Denji says, I was so close to getting to have sex and kisses. I could have had unlimited kisses. And Poshita cuts off Denji and said, it's good that you didn't get to do that, Denji. And Denji is confused by this. Like, are you serious, Poshita? Like, I don't understand what you're saying. Poshita says, when you found a precious family, when you got to go to the school you wanted to attend, and when you connected with Asa, some part of you was still unhappy, right? And Denji is shocked by this response, but him not responding is telling me that Poshita is telling the truth. Poshita says, unfortunately, you must have noticed too, you were far happier starving and suffering, fighting devils, and eating spoiled bread in that rundown shack. And then Poshita turns into Black Chainsaw Man Poshita. And Poshita says, turns out you had the crappiest but best kind of brain, one that can only find heaven when you're in hell. And Poshita gives Denji the biggest hug I think we ever seen in the series. It feels like the amount of times Denji has gotten a hug has been the hug of death, and despair, where every time someone gives Denji a hug, someone gives him that passionate affection, that emotional reception, it's like every time that happens to Denji, they die. When this happens, Denji is just shocked, and Poshita ends up stabbing himself in the heart and grabs his own heart. Poshita says, Denji, I'm going to eat myself now. And Denji's like, what the hell, Poshita? And Poshita's like, I don't know what will happen afterward either. A world in which Chainsaw Man doesn't exist. A world in which I never existed will be created. And Denji's like, I don't want you to do that. I don't want to lose you. And Poshita's like, in a world without me, maybe you could keep dreaming. Since meeting you, I've seen all the dreams I want to see. And does the piece keep on dreaming, Denji? And then Poshita apparently dies. He eats himself, and then the world is now reset to something that we have no idea about. And we're back in the woods, back in chapter 1 of the series, back in Denji's shack. And that's the end of this chapter. There's been a lot of conflicting reports. First, to start off, when the chapter first came out, because I remember I read it when it first came out, that it said that the final chapter was next week. And then now on Shonen Jump, it said, not next week, 2 weeks from now. But then now it says that, no, it's to be continued. So at this point, we don't know. At this point, I still am believing that the next chapter is the last chapter, because I heard on multiple different sources that it's still the last chapter. But it was very weird that Shonen Jump did that. But anyway, let's go into the main things that we need to talk about. So let's start at the beginning. So Poshita has been the major controversy throughout the day, the last 2 days since the chapter came out. And people are confused on what Poshita means. So Poshita has been with Denji since day 1, since everything that's happened with Chainsaw Man part 1 and part 2. Poshita has seen everything. Poshita has seen the ups and downs of Denji's life and Denji's choices. And I think the main thing about part 2 that you need to remember is that part 2 is all about the consequence of being Chainsaw Man. Part 1 was all about Denji becoming Chainsaw Man, becoming his mold, becoming a bigger person that he used to be, and dealing with higher issues that a person his age would ever have to deal with. And part 2 is dealing with the issues of being Chainsaw Man. It's dealing with the fact that Denji, you can't have a normal family. Denji, you can't go to school. You can't just be happy. You can't just chill and be happy. And I think that's one of the things that Poshita is mainly talking about to Denji, explaining his decision. Poshita's not really that's the only problem with the chapter as well that people have, is that Poshita's not really explaining his decision. But this is why you read books, so we can infer what Poshita means. Anyway, One thing that is very sticking to my brain is that a lot of people are saying that Denji's life was terrible without Poshita. And I would agree that it was, because Denji even said, like in the first chapter of Chainsaw Man, that he was literally going to die basically of a heart condition, or most likely going to die of a heart condition. He was spitting out blood, and then he told Poshita about how his mom died of the heart condition. So we don't even know what's going to happen to Denji now. Is he still going to have that heart condition and all the other stuff? We'll have to wait till next chapter. So I'm not going to focus really on that today. What I want to focus more on is the fact that Poshita is coming from a place of love. Remember, they've been together for a long time. A long time. And everything good and bad that has happened to Denji has stemmed from the fact that he is Chainsaw Man. Everything has stemmed from the fact that he's Chainsaw Man. Good and bad. And part one, all the things that was happening with Makima that Denji believed was good at the time was because he was Chainsaw Man. All the things that, the reason that he met his favorite people in the world, Aki and Power, was because he was Chainsaw Man. Part two, he had his family with Nayata because he was Chainsaw Man. He was able to go to school and be able to live his life out because he was Chainsaw Man. Like, a lot of the positives in Denji's life is because he's Chainsaw Man. He genuinely loves to be Chainsaw Man and stuff like that. But also, him being Chainsaw Man is the worst thing in his life. Poshita has seen that him being Chainsaw Man has gotten Denji killed, stabbed, shot, attacked, kidnapped, mutilated, abused. Like, literally everything bad that has happened to Denji that Poshita has seen is because of the fact that he's Chainsaw Man. Now, the way that I disagree with Poshita is the fact that Denji's life was already terrible before Poshita. Denji's life was predetermined to be terrible because of the action, because of the Yakuza, with the fact that Denji's father was stuck in that group with the Yakuza, and then he had to work off that debt, and then also the fact that his mom was predisposed to a heart condition. So Denji's life was basically destined to be terrible. And Poshita's the only thing that has really kind of put Denji in a position to where he has a better chance of succeeding than if he didn't have Chainsaw Man. But then again, that was in the past. I believe that there's going to be a part 3, and part 3 is going to deal with the repercussions of the fact that Denji isn't Chainsaw Man, and how his life is actually affected by the fact he's not Chainsaw Man, and what he can do to bring Poshita back. And a lot of the things that we can talk about with bringing Poshita back is stuff like the whole Fumiko aging devil, eternity devil situation, where if Chainsaw Man eats a devil, it erases the devil, but it doesn't erases the history of the devil, but it doesn't erase all the things that devil did. So, for example, let's say that Denji ate the water devil, and then the water devil would disappear, would cease to exist, but all the things that the water devil did, or water did throughout the earth, would still be affected on the earth. So that's the whole thing that happened with that arc, where they were eating ears and the ears would come back. They would also forget about ears. And then also, like, with Makima talking to Kishibe about how how Poshita's powers work, where they would forget about the nuclear devil, the AIDS devil, and stuff like that. That's what happens whenever a devil is erased. It doesn't really rewrite reality. It rewrites people's brains of what happened. So I know people are saying, like, how is this going to change things? The way that I believe it would change things is that if Poshita's gone, I'm still leaning on the fact that everything that happened with Poshita eating certain devils would be reversed, but I don't believe that reality in itself would be reversed. So we would still be in the aftermath of two dangerous devils that were destroying the world or fighting with each other, Asa and Poshita, but also all the bug devils that were coming out of hell, and that stuff would still be, the aftermath of those events would still happen. It's just that no one would remember who it was. So that's what it means when Poshita eats a devil or erases a devil, is that the actions that they already made still happen. They still happened, but people just don't remember who it is. And we learned that in part 2 that devils can be reinvented. The nuclear weapons devil was reinvented by the fact that Yoru, the war devil, was getting stronger and stronger, and then it forced people to reinvent nuclear weapons. So we're already being told and shown that devils are never truly gone because they can always be reinvented. So I think in part 3, some way, somehow, Poshita will be reinvented, and Denji will like get back to being Chainsaw Man. But the interesting thing about part 3 that will answer so many questions is there are still a lot of theories, and I believe so too, that Denji is not really the Chainsaw Man devil, or Poshita is not necessarily the Chainsaw Man devil, and it's something more specific, something more crazy, because of the fact that his power is so immense, and his power shouldn't be that immense for a chainsaw devil. But that's something that I hope is discovered or explained in part 3, because there's been a lot of theories about that, about how Poshita is not truly the Chainsaw Man devil. And a lot of that stuff can be answered with part 3, with really knowing the truth behind the fact, how does the erasing devil power work. But let's talk about Denji. Denji's life, like I said, has always been terrible and predisposed to terrible things. But everything Poshita is saying is coming from a place of knowing how Denji truly feels. At all times, Poshita and Denji are connected. They know how they truly feel. They are the ultimate being in terms of like, they are fully merged, right? Asa and Yoru are like this hybrid fiend mix, but Yoru has a lot more control over Asa. Denji and Poshita have full control of each other. The only way Poshita has control of Denji is if Denji's contract with Poshita is broken, which is the fact that Poshita wants to see Denji's dreams and see Denji happy, and whenever Denji is like reaching like the highest breaking point, that's when the contract is broken and Poshita can take control. But when Poshita takes control, like, you know, he's just doing the things that he think would help Denji the most compared to other devils and stuff like that. So everything Poshita's feeling or saying comes from the fact that he's constantly feeling how Denji feels every day. He knows that when you go to school, the school you wanted to attend, and when you connect with Asa, some part of you was still unhappy. He is saying that because that is a fact. He knows that Denji was always unhappy. And unfortunately, you must have noticed too, you were far happier starving and suffering, fighting devils and eating spoiled bread in that rundown shack. So remember, every time that Denji, or every time that Poshita was with Denji, or telling Denji like, this is how you felt, is when they were together. They were together in that shack with each other every day, seeing how Denji was happy every day with Poshita. So Poshita is misunderstanding that he is the sole reason why Denji was so happy in that shack. Why Denji was so happy starving and suffering, fighting tomato devils and eating spoiled bread, is because he wasn't alone. He was with Poshita, and that's where Poshita is misunderstanding, and why he thinks that if he disappears, or if Denji is no longer Chainsaw Man, having to deal with all the terrible things that we talked about that he had to deal with in part 1 and part 2, that he would be happy. That's the misunderstanding from Poshita, because Poshita's not understanding that every time that Denji was happy when they were starving, when they were fighting devils, was because he wasn't alone. He was with Poshita. And so this is going to be like the biggest heartbreak to Denji that will change a lot of how he feels going into part 3, because he lost Nayata because of his actions. He's losing Poshita because of the fact that Poshita believes that Denji's life would just be better without him. He lost every person in part 2 because of directly his actions of being Chainsaw Man, and the consequences, people telling him these are the consequences of being Chainsaw Man. Then again, there was still some stuff out of Denji's control, such as Barum. I think that's a lot of stuff that people are ignoring, that Barum was kind of putting Denji in a situation where he had to be Chainsaw Man no matter what. But it still is really, really sad that a lot of the actions in part 2 are directly because of Denji's inability to drop Chainsaw Man. But those are the main things that I'm thinking about from the chapter. Like I said, we have no idea how the world's going to react to everything with Poshita eating himself, but I don't think that it's going to just like erase everything or erase reality. That's not how it works. But the world will definitely be a different place without Poshita, and we have no idea if the devils inside of Poshita are gonna stay dead because he's gone. There's two theories, like, oh, and like I said, every time that a devil is erased, the world doesn't change. Like, the world doesn't, like, the actions that they did doesn't change. It's that people forget who made those actions. It's just gonna be, oh, a devil. But if he already ate devils and digested them, then again, whenever he eats them, he doesn't digest them. They just sit there. That's why they're able to like be thrown up and stuff. So I would infer that they're gonna come out. That all the devils that Poshita ate is gonna come out, so the Death Devil will be back and stuff like that. And so the world would just be different. It'll just be a world without Chainsaw Man, without Poshita, a world without a devil that can basically clean up devils, that can erase devils that are going way too hard. And it kind of changes the whole devil cycle on its head, where devils are always going to keep coming in and out, in and out, in and out, and there's no like regulation at all. So it's very, very interesting what part 3 is going to be, because part 3 is going to be, ooh, if Poshita was one of the strongest devils in all of Chainsaw Man, and there's a lot of devils that are just crazy strong that not a lot of people on Earth can deal with. And a lot of people are gonna everyone's gonna forget basically who Chainsaw Man is. Like there wasn't a Chainsaw Man, it's just gonna be a devil. And Denji is supposed to, that's one thing I gotta also talk about, is that, remember, whenever a devil is erased, everyone forgets what happened in that moment. So I'm in that time. So I'm thinking that, is Denji going to forget Poshita? And from previous situations that happened in the series, I would assume yes. But this is a shonen, and I feel like shonen would probably hurt more for the viewer, and Fujimoto would want us to hurt more if Denji remembers everything. But knowing how the world works, I would assume that Denji is not going to remember Poshita. It depends on how Fujimoto feels and how he wants to hurt the audience the most. And that's another thing that people don't realize, that Fujimoto is a person that wants the audience to hurt, because the world is a hurtful place. The world is a hurtful place, but he's also showing that, like, if you're chasing the small hype, the quick money, the quick thrills, then your life is never going to be fulfilled. And that's one thing that Denji is always chasing in part 2 that Fujimoto is trying to tell us. Like, one of the first things that Denji says to Poshita is, I was so close to getting to have sex and kisses. I could have had unlimited kisses. Those were all temporary thrills, temporary excitement, temporary, like, happiness. And Fujimoto's telling us that Denji is wrong for that, and then us as the audience is wrong for trying to chase those cheap thrills. That your life will never be fulfilled if you're not fulfilling your purpose. And Denji has not fulfilled his purpose and is still figuring out what his purpose is. And I believe that's what part 3 is all about. I think it's all about the fact that Denji needs to fulfill his purpose and find his purpose without being Chainsaw Man, so that he can become Chainsaw Man. Kind of like Spider-Man Homecoming, where Peter had to find his inner fulfillment, or his self-worth as Peter and Spider-Man, without needing Tony's suits, any of his Spider-Man suits. But I think that's everything I want to talk about today. Thank you guys for watching the video. I'm sorry that I can't put too many manga panels over the chapters because of the fact of all the copyright stuff, and I don't want to post this video and then it just gets deleted right after. So that's why, like, there's gameplay, there's no like chat, like any of that other stuff, like none of the manga panels, because I don't want this video getting taken down. But thank you guys for watching the video. I've been really busy with schoolwork. Your YouTuber becoming a teacher, so it's been really hard, a lot of studying, so I've not been uploading, but I still want to get back into uploading, just to yap about the stuff. Like, I've been wanting to talk about Chainsaw Man for a minute. It's just been so busy, but today it was one of those days where I'm like actually free before class, and I wanted to really talk about this chapter, because this chapter has a lot of opinions on Twitter, and Twitter have been blowing up. But I wanted to get my thoughts off, and if the next chapter is the last chapter, best believe I will be reviewing it and giving my thoughts, because I can't wait till part 2 ends. I mean that in the most positive way I can, because I don't know about y'all, I've been wanting to reread part 2 so bad. I've been wanting to reread it so bad, just so I can remember everything, so I can talk about it for a video, just a long video of me not ranting, but like talking about part 2 in its entirety. But it's just been very hard to do that with school, but also like I don't want to reread it and then the series isn't completed. Because one thing about Chainsaw Man that feels amazing is reading Chainsaw Man all together. That's one thing that people on Twitter keep ignoring, that Chainsaw Man suffers from the fact that it's a weekly manga, because reading it weekly, it's like batshit crazy every week, and you're just like, what the hell? And then you forget about some of the small things that Fujimoto's setting up, and then reading Chainsaw Man all together is very beautiful. Like rereading part 1 is very, very beautiful. I low-key want to do it again, reread all of Chainsaw Man when part 2 ends. I want to reread all of Chainsaw Man, part 1 through part 2, and talk about everything. But we'll see how that goes. But thank you guys for watching the video. Leave a like, subscribe, and support content like this, and hit that bell, posting consistently. And I'm gonna see you guys next time. Peace.